They say justice is blind, but sometimes it just needs a pair of reading glasses to see the truth. Meet Silas Sterling, a man who had it all: the penthouse, the millions, and the arrogance to match. He dragged his quiet, unassuming wife, Sarah, into courtroom 4B, with one goal: to throw her out on the street with nothing but the clothes on her back. He thought he was the smartest man in the room. He thought he had bought the perfect victory. But he forgot one tiny, insignificant detail: his wife's maiden name. When the judge opened that file and saw who she really was, the silence in the courtroom was louder than a gunshot. Stick around, because you are about to witness the most satisfying, brutal takedown in family court history. Silas Sterling adjusted the cuffs of his bespoke Italian suit, catching his reflection in the tinted window of the town car. He looked every inch the Manhattan real estate tycoon. He was sharp, ruthless, and undeniably handsome in a cold, statuesque way. Today was the day. Finally, he was cutting the dead weight. He glanced at his phone. A text from his lawyer, Preston Walsh, flashed on the screen. "Motion for exclusive occupancy is ready. We'll have her out of the penthouse by noon." Silas smirked. He didn't just want a divorce. He wanted a demolition. 7 years ago, Silas had married Sarah. Back then, she was sweet, quiet Sarah Miller, a librarian he'd met at a charity gala. She was the perfect accessory for a rising star, docile, supportive, and content to stay in the background while Silas conquered the city. But as Silas's wealth skyrocketed, hitting the 9-figure mark, Sarah's quiet nature began to irritate him. She refused to play the socialite game. She wore vintage clothes instead of the designer gowns he bought her. She embarrassed him with her simplicity. And then there was Tiffany. Tiffany was 23, an Instagram model, and understood the assignment: look expensive, stay loud, and worship Silas. Silas looked out the window as the car turned onto Center Street. He had been planning this for months. He had hidden assets in offshore accounts in the Caymans. He had manipulated the pre-enup. But his masterpiece was today's motion. He wasn't waiting for the divorce to finalize. He was petitioning Judge Harrison O'Malley for an immediate remove order, claiming Sarah was mentally unstable and a threat to his safety. It was a lie, of course. Sarah wouldn't hurt a fly. But Preston Walsh was the kind of lawyer who could argue that a bunny rabbit was an apex predator if the check cleared. "We're here, Mr. Sterling," the driver said. Silas stepped out, cameras flashing instantly. He ignored them, striding toward the courthouse steps. He spotted Sarah standing near the entrance. She looked pathetic. She was wearing a grey wool coat that had seen better days, her brown hair pulled back in a messy bun. She stood alone, clutching a battered leather briefcase. No entourage, no shark lawyer, just Sarah. Silas slowed down, leaning in as he passed her. "Pack your things, Sarah," he whispered, his voice silky and cruel. "Preston's already sent the movers. By the time we leave this building, the locks will be changed." Sarah looked up. Her eyes, usually soft and brown, looked different today. They were tired, yes, but there was something else. A hardness he hadn't seen before. "The hearing hasn't started yet, Silas," she said softly. "It was over before it started, darling. You're a librarian. I'm me. Do the math." He brushed past her, checking his watch. 9:00 a.m. By 10:00 a.m. he'd be a free man. By lunch he'd be celebrating with Tiffany at Le Bernardin. Inside the courthouse, the air was thick with the smell of floor wax and desperation. Silas loved it. This was his arena. He met Preston Walsh outside courtroom 4B. Preston was a short, angry-looking man who billed $1,200 an hour and was worth every penny. "She's got a public defender?" Silas asked, gesturing vaguely toward where Sarah had walked. Preston laughed, a dry, barking sound. "Worse. She's representing herself." "Proce, it's suicide, Silas. She's bringing a butter knife to a nuclear war." The Judge O'Malley. "He hates proce litigants. They waste his time. He'll grant our motion just to get her out of his face." Silas felt a surge of adrenaline, representing herself. It was almost too easy. He actually felt a pang of pity for her. Almost. "Let's finish this," Silas said. They pushed open the heavy oak doors. The courtroom was intimidating: high ceilings, mahogany benches, and the great seal of the state of New York looming behind the bench. It was empty, save for the bailiff and the court reporter. Sarah walked in a moment later. She sat at the defendant's table, placing her battered briefcase on the shiny wood. She looked small, insignificant. "All rise," the bailiff bellowed. Judge Harrison O'Malley swept into the room. He was a legend in the New York family court circuit. 60 years old, with a face carved from granite and a reputation for zero tolerance. He didn't suffer fools, and he certainly didn't suffer drama. He sat down, his black robe rustling, and peered over his half-moon spectacles. "Docket number 44920, the clerk announced. "Sterling versus Sterling. Motion for immediate exclusive occupancy and preliminary asset division." "Good morning, Your Honor," Preston Walsh boomed, standing up and buttoning his jacket. He projected confidence, his voice filling the room. "Preston Walsh for the plaintiff, Mr. Silas Sterling." The judge nodded, bored. He looked at Sarah. And for the defendant, Sarah stood up. Her voice was quiet, but it didn't shake. "I am representing myself, Your Honor." Judge O'Malley sighed audibly. He took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. Mrs. Sterling, I strongly advise against self-representation in a case involving assets of this magnitude. Are you sure you wish to proceed without counsel?" "I am sure, Your Honor." "I can't afford one," Sarah said, her eyes fixed on Silas. Silas suppressed a chuckle. He had cut off her credit cards 3 weeks ago. "Very well," the judge grunted. "Mr. Walsh, this is your motion. Make it quick." This was it. The beginning of the end. Preston Walsh didn't just walk to the podium. He prowled. He laid out a stack of documents, treating them like weapons of war. "Your Honor, Preston," began his tone grave. "We are here today because my client, Mr. Sterling, is in an impossible situation. He is a prominent figure in the New York business community. He runs Sterling Developments, a company responsible for thousands of jobs. His home is not just a residence, it is a place of business." Preston paused for effect, glancing at Sarah with disdain. "Mrs. Sterling, unfortunately, has become erratic. We have affidavits here from house staff stating that she has been prone to violent outbursts. She has threatened to destroy Mr. Sterling's professional reputation. She has created a hostile environment that makes it impossible for my client to work or live in his own home. A home, I might add, that he purchased entirely with his own earnings. It was a fabrication. The staff were 2 maids Silas had hired last week, specifically to sign these papers. We are asking for immediate exclusive occupancy." Preston continued, his voice rising. We want Mrs. Sterling removed from the penthouse at 15 Central Park West, effectively immediately. Today. We are willing to provide her with a stipend for a motel for 2 weeks, which is more than generous, given the psychological torment she has inflicted on my client." Silas watched the judge. O'Malley was reading the documents, his brow furrowed. He seemed to be buying it. Why wouldn't he? Silas Sterling was a pillar of the community. Sarah was nobody. A motel judge, O'Malley asked, looking up. "A reputable one." "Your Honor," Preston assured him. "We just need to ensure Mr. Sterling's safety and the security of his business assets." The judge turned his gaze to Sarah. She sat perfectly still, her hands folded on top of her files. "Mrs. Sterling," the judge said, his voice stern. "You have heard the plaintiff's motion. They want you out. Today." "What do you have to say for yourself?" Silas leaned back in his chair, crossing his legs. This was the part where she would cry. She would beg. She would talk about her feelings, and the judge would shut her down. Sarah stood up slowly. She didn't look at Preston. She didn't look at Silas. She looked straight at Judge O'Malley. "Your Honor," Sarah said, her voice clearer now, projecting to the back of the room. "Mr. Walsh is very eloquent, but he has omitted a few key facts regarding the property at 15 Central Park West. Facts such as," O'Malley asked, tapping his pen, "such as the fact that Mr. Mountfort Sterling does not own it," Sarah said simply. The silence in the room was instant. Silas frowned. What was she talking about? Of course he owned it. He paid the mortgage. He paid the taxes. Preston scoffed loudly. "Objection, Your Honor. This is delusional. We have the deed right here." He waved a piece of paper. "Mr. Sterling has paid every cent of the mortgage for the last 5 years. He pays the mortgage on the lease." Sarah corrected, her tone icy. "He doesn't hold the title." "This is a waste of time," Preston snapped. "Your Honor, this is exactly the kind of erratic behavior we are talking about. She is detached from reality." Judge O'Malley looked annoyed. "Mrs. Sterling, do you have documentation to support this claim? Because if you are wasting the court's time with frivolous theories, I will hold you in contempt." "I do, Your Honor," Sarah said. She opened her battered briefcase. She didn't pull out a mess of crumpled papers. She pulled out a single blue-bound legal folio. It looked old. The paper was heavy cream-colored, the kind they didn't make anymore. "May I approach the bench?" she asked. "You may," O'Malley said, looking skeptical. Sarah walked past Silas. She smelled of vanilla and old books. For a second, just a second, Silas felt a flicker of unease. She was too calm. She handed the folio to the judge. O'Malley took it. He adjusted his glasses. He opened the cover. Silas watched the judge's face closely. He expected a frown. He expected the judge to toss it back. Instead, Judge O'Malley froze. His eyes widened. He leaned closer to the paper. He read the first line, then the second. His head snapped up, looking at Sarah with a completely different expression. It wasn't annoyance anymore. It was shock. And recognition. "This is a land trust deed," the judge said, his voice dropping an octave. "Yes, Your Honor," Sarah said. "Dated 1954. The judge looked at her. "Yes, Your Honor." "And the grantor?" The judge paused, swallowing hard. He looked at the name at the bottom of the document. Then he looked at the name on his docket sheet. Sterling versus Sterling. Mrs. Sterling, the judge said slowly. Your maiden name on the marriage certificate. It says Miller. That is my mother's name, Sarah replied. I used it to avoid complications. My legal name, the name on my birth certificate, and the name on that trust is different. Mr. Walsh, the judge, barked, his demeanor suddenly aggressive toward Silas's lawyer. Did you run a title search on the penthouse? We assumed, Preston stammered. Mr. Sterling has lived there for... You assumed, O'Malley's voice thundered. You come into my courtroom asking to evict a woman from her home, and you didn't check who actually owns the building. Silas's heart hammered against his ribs. He leaned forward. Your Honor, I bought that apartment. I have the papers. You have a sublease, Mr. Sterling, the judge snapped. You are renting. High-end renting, but renting nonetheless. The judge looked back at Sarah. He closed the blue folder reverently. The name on this trust, the judge said, looking at Sarah with a strange mixture of awe and fear, is Kensington. Silas blinked. Kensington, Isabella. Sarah Kensington, the judge asked. Yes, Your Honor, she whispered. Silas felt the blood drain from his face. The name didn't mean much to him, just an old, fancy-sounding name. But to a lawyer, to a judge in New York City, the Kensingtons weren't just rich. They were the bedrock of the New York legal system. They owned half the judiciary. They owned the land the courthouse stood on. And apparently, they owned the building Silas lived in. My grandfather was Archibald Kensington, Sarah said quietly. Judge O'Malley sat back in his chair, exhaling a long breath. Archibald Kensington was the Supreme Court Justice who had sworn O'Malley in 20 years ago. He was a legal deity. Mr. Sterling, the judge, said, his voice dangerously low. You just tried to evict the granddaughter of Archibald Kensington from a building her family has owned since the 1920s. Silas looked at Preston. Preston looked like he was about to vomit. I didn't know, Silas whispered. Sarah turned to look at him. A small, sad smile played on her lips. I know you didn't, Silas. You never asked. The judge glared at Silas. Motion for exclusive occupancy is denied. In fact, I am inclined to issue a reverse order. Mr. Sterling, you have until 5 p.m. to vacate the premises. If the Kensington Trust owns the building, you are the guest here. Silas stood up, his legs shaking. You can't do that. I'm Silas Sterling. And she is a Kensington. The judge slammed his gavel down, the sound echoing like a cannon blast. Court is in recess for 15 minutes. Mr. Walsh. I suggest you use this time to explain to your client just how badly he has screwed up. The heavy oak doors of courtroom 4B swung shut behind them, muffling the sound of the gallery's murmurs. In the sterile, fluorescent-lit hallway, the dynamic had shifted violently. 10 minutes ago, Silas Sterling was the king of the jungle, and Preston Walsh was his hired gun. Now Preston looked like a man who had just realized he was holding a live grenade. Preston slammed his briefcase against the marble wall. You idiot, Preston! Hissed his face, flushing a deep, unhealthy crimson. You absolute arrogant idiot! Silas straightened his tie, though his hands were trembling slightly. Watch your tone, Preston. I pay you to fix things, not to lecture me. So what if her grandfather was a judge? That was 50 years ago. It's nepotism. We can appeal. Preston let out a strangled laugh. He grabbed Silas by the lapel of his expensive suit, pulling him close. You don't get it, do you? You think this is about a family tree? This is about power, Silas. Real power. The kind of power that doesn't scream on Instagram. Preston released him, pacing in a tight circle. The Kensingtons aren't just a family, they are an institution. The firm I work for, Walsh, O'Hare and Associates. The O'Hare is Sarah's uncle. The building our firm leases office space in owned by the Kensington Trust. You just walked me into a courtroom and made me try to evict the landlord's daughter from her own property. My career is over. I'm dead in this town. Silas scoffed, brushing off his jacket. You're being dramatic. She's a librarian, Preston. She wears cardigan sweaters and drives a Honda. She's been playing poor for 7 years. If she was really that powerful, why did she let me walk all over her? Before Preston could answer, the courtroom doors opened. Sarah stepped out. She looked different. It wasn't that her clothes had changed. She was still in that grey coat, but her posture was transformed. The hunch was gone. Her chin was high. The timid wife who flinched at Silas's loud voice had vanished, replaced by a woman who looked like she owned the very air they were breathing. Silas stepped into her path, his old habits kicking in. He tried to loom over her, to use his height to intimidate. You think this is funny, Sarah? He spat. Lying to the court. Hiding assets. I'll sue you for fraud. I'll make sure you... Silas, she said. She didn't shout. She didn't shrink. She just said his name with a tone of utter boredom. Stop. Don't you tell me to... I said stop. Her eyes locked onto his, cold and hard as diamonds. You have until 5:00 p.m. I suggest you hurry. The Kensington building management team is very strict about unauthorized tenants, and right now that's you. I'm your husband. You're the defendant, she corrected. And by the way, I'm freezing the joint accounts. You might want to cancel your reservation at Le Bernardin. Tiffany will be disappointed. Silas froze. He hadn't mentioned Le Bernardin to anyone but the reservation line. How did you... Sarah stepped closer, lowering her voice so only he could hear. I'm a librarian, Silas. We know how to research. I know about the accounts in the Caymans. I know about the shell company in Delaware. I know about Tiffany. I've known for 2 years. I was just waiting for you to make the first move. I wanted to see if you had a shred of decency left. She paused, looking him up and down with pity. You didn't. She walked past him, her heels clicking rhythmically on the floor. Silas watched her go, a knot of genuine fear tightening in his stomach. He turned to Preston. Fix this, Silas demanded. Preston shook his head, backing away. Fix it yourself. I'm recusing myself. I'm not losing my license for you. You can't quit. I'll sue you. Get in line, Mr. Sterling. Preston turned and walked rapidly toward the elevators, leaving Silas alone in the hallway. Silas checked his watch. 11:30 a.m. He had 5 hours to get to the penthouse, pack his valuables, and figure out a plan. He pulled out his phone and dialed his driver. Bring the car around. Now. The ride back to Central Park West was a blur of panic and rage. Silas convinced himself that this was just a setback. He still had the business. He still had the money, millions of it. So what if he lost the apartment? He would buy a better one, a bigger one. He would crush Sarah with his wealth. The town car pulled up to 15 Central Park West. Usually the doormen would rush to open his door, greeting him with a deferential, "Good afternoon, Mr. Sterling." Today the curb was empty. Silas opened his own door, slamming it shut. He marched toward the glass entrance. The head concierge, a man named Arthur, who Silas had tipped generously every Christmas, or rather, Sarah had tipped him using Silas's money, stood in front of the revolving doors. He was flanked by two large men in dark suits, who definitely were not hotel staff. "Good afternoon, Mr. Sterling, Arthur," said his face impassive. "Move, Arthur." Silas snapped. "I'm in a hurry. I'm afraid I can't let you up, sir," Arthur said politely. "Excuse me. I live here." "Not anymore, sir. We received a court order via fax 20 minutes ago. The leaseholder, Ms. Kensington, has revoked your access privileges. My stuff is up there, my suits, my watches, my safe." Silas screamed, causing a passing tourist couple to stop and stare. "Your personal effects are being handled as we speak," Arthur said. He pointed to the side entrance near the service loading dock. Silas looked. There, on the dirty concrete sidewalk, sat a pile of black industrial garbage bags. Silas felt the blood drain from his face. He ran over to the bags. He ripped one open. Inside, his $5,000 Brioni suits were wadded up in a ball, mixed in with his shoes and underwear. "You can't do this," Silas howled, holding up a wrinkled blazer. "This is destruction of property." "Actually, sir," Arthur called out, "Ms. Kensington gave specific instructions to the movers to use standard eviction protocol. She said you would be familiar with it, as it's the same protocol your company uses for your low-income tenants in Queens." The irony hit Silas like a physical slap. He had evicted hundreds of families this way. Trash bags on the curb, locks changed by noon. He had always called it efficient. He stood there on the sidewalk surrounded by garbage bags as the paparazzi tipped off by someone began to arrive on scooters. Flashbulbs popped. Click, click, click. Silas shielded his face with a crumpled designer jacket. His phone buzzed in his pocket. It was Tiffany. "Hey babe, my card just got declined at Saks." It was humiliating. "Fix it, now." Silas stared at the text. He tried to log into his banking app. Access denied. Account frozen. Pending litigation. He stared at the screen. He had no apartment. He had no cash. He had no lawyer. And he was standing on a sidewalk in a pile of garbage while the New York Post photographer zoomed in on his face. But Silas Sterling was a fighter. Or so he told himself. He gritted his teeth. "They think they can break me. I built Sterling Developments from nothing. I am a self-made man. I don't need the Kensingtons." He would soon find out just how wrong he was. 3 days later, Silas sat in the lobby of a Holiday Inn in Midtown. It was a far cry from the Four Seasons, but it was all he could manage with the cash he had in his wallet, about $400. Tiffany had left him approximately 6 minutes after he told her the accounts were temporarily frozen. She had called him a fraud and blocked his number. That stung, but not as much as the silence from his business partners. He had spent the last 72 hours frantically trying to find a new lawyer. Most had hung up the moment he said his name. The Kensington influence was toxic. Finally, he found a guy named Saul Goodman-type attorney, a strip mall lawyer named Barry the Bulldog Levine. Barry worked out of an office above a falafel shop in Hell's Kitchen and smelled faintly of relish. "Look, kid," Barry said, sitting across from Silas in the hotel lobby, chewing on a toothpick. I read the file. "You're in deep. But we have one angle." "The business," Silas said, leaning in. "Sterling Developments. It's worth $200 million. It's separate from the marriage. I started it before I met Sarah. It's premarital property." "Exactly." Barry grinned, showing yellow teeth. We go after the business. We prove you're the rainmaker. We argue that even if she has the trust fund, you have the earned income. We get the judge to unfreeze the corporate accounts so you can operate. Then we siphon enough out to fight her. It was a desperate plan. But it was a plan. The hearing for the asset freeze was set for that afternoon. Silas put on the least wrinkled suit he had salvaged from the garbage bags and slicked back his hair. He needed to look like a CEO, not a homeless person. When they entered the courtroom, Sarah was already there. This time, she wasn't alone. Sitting next to her was a phalanx of lawyers, men in suits so sharp they could cut glass. At the head of the table sat confident, silver-haired man. Silas recognized him instantly from the covers of Forbes and Time. Elias Thorne, the most expensive divorce attorney in the country. He was the guy billionaires called when they wanted to destroy their ex-wives. And now he was sitting next to Sarah. "All rise," the bailiff called. Judge O'Malley looked at the new lineup. He raised an eyebrow at Barry Levine, then looked at Elias Thorne. Mr. Thorne, the judge, nodded. "I see Mrs. Sterling has upgraded her counsel." "She has, Your Honor," Thorne said. His voice was like melted chocolate, smooth, rich, and utterly commanding. "And we are ready to proceed with the financial discovery." Barry Levine stood up, adjusting his cheap tie. "Your Honor, we are moving to unfreeze the accounts of Sterling Developments. My client's business is suffering. This is a separate entity wholly owned by Mr. Sterling, founded prior to the marriage. It is not marital property. Is that so?" Thorne asked, not even standing up. He simply slid a thick binder across the table toward the judge. "Your Honor," Thorne continued, "Mr. Sterling labors under the delusion that he is a self-made man. It is a common affliction among the nouveau riche. However, the forensic accounting tells a different story." Silas felt a bead of sweat roll down his back. "I built that company," he shouted. "I scraped together the seed money. I worked 18-hour days, Mr. Sterling." "Please be quiet," the judge warned. Thorne opened his own copy of the binder. "Your Honor, if you turn to page 4, the initial incorporation of Sterling Developments in 2016. The seed capital was $5 million. Mr. Sterling." "Where did you get that money?" Silas hesitated. "Investors, private equity, silent partners." "Correct," Thorne said. "And who were those silent partners? I don't know the exact names of the holding companies." "It was a blind trust." Thorne smiled. It was a terrifying smile. It was the Archibald Kensington Testamentary Trust. The room went dead silent. Silas blinked. "What the money?" Thorne said slowly, as if explaining to a child, "came from your wife, Sarah. She instructed the trustees to invest in your little startup. She didn't want you to know because she didn't want to bruise your fragile ego. She wanted you to feel like a big man. So she funded you anonymously." That's a lie," Silas stammered. "It is documented," Thorne said. "Turn to page 10. Every major project you won in the city. The waterfront redevelopment. The Midtown high-rise. The land was owned by Kensington subsidiaries. They accepted your bids because Sarah told them to. You haven't been running a business, Silas. You've been running a lemonade stand funded by your wife's allowance." Silas felt the room spinning. His entire identity, his ego, his pride, his reputation as a shark was dissolving. He wasn't a tycoon. He was a charity case, a nepotism hire who didn't even know he was a nepotism hire. "But," Silas's voice cracked, "I did the work. I managed the projects. poorly, Thorne countered. Page 20. The forensic audit shows that Sterling Developments has actually been bleeding money for 3 years. You've been covering the losses by moving funds around essentially a Ponzi scheme against yourself. The only thing keeping the company afloat was quarterly injections of cash from... Guess who? Thorne pointed a manicured finger at Sarah. Sarah sat there looking at Silas. Her expression wasn't angry anymore. It was just disappointed. I tried to help you, Silas, she said softly. I wanted you to succeed. I thought if you felt successful, you'd be happy. And if you were happy, maybe you'd be kind. She shook her head. But the more money I gave you, the crueler you became. Barry Levine. Silas's lawyer started packing his briefcase. Where are you going? Silas hissed. I'm out, Barry whispered. This isn't a divorce case, kid. This is a massacre. You're insolvent. You don't own the company. You don't own the apartment. You owe the Kensington Trust about $50 million in misappropriated funds if they decide to press charges for the mismanagement. I can't help you. Barry stood up. Your Honor, I request permission to withdraw as counsel. Granted, Judge O'Malley said instantly. The judge looked down at Silas. The look was withering. Mr. Sterling, it appears that everything you have, your suit, your watch, your company, your reputation, is property of the Kensington estate. I am granting the motion to maintain the freeze on all assets. Furthermore, given the evidence of financial mismanagement, I am appointing a court receiver to take over Sterling Developments, effective immediately. You're taking my company. Silas gasped. It's not your company, Sarah said. It never was. Mrs. Sterling, the judge said, turning to her with a warm smile. The court apologizes for the time this has taken. We will reconvene next week to finalize the divorce decree. In the meantime, I trust you have secure housing. I do your honor, Sarah said. I'm moving back into the main house in the Hamptons. The city is a bit noisy right now. She stood up, gathered her files, and walked out surrounded by her team of legal gladiators. Silas sat alone at the defendant's table. The silence of the room was deafening. He looked at his hands. They were shaking uncontrollably. He had walked into this courthouse a week ago thinking he was throwing out the trash. Now he realized he was the trash. But the nightmare wasn't over. As Silas stumbled out of the courtroom, dazed and broken, 2 men in trench coats were waiting for him by the exit. They weren't lawyers, and they weren't paparazzi. One of them flashed a badge. Silas Sterling. Yes, Silas whispered. I'm Special Agent Miller with the IRS. And this is Agent Carter from the FBI. We'd like to have a word with you about your offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. It seems there are some discrepancies regarding tax evasion and money laundering. Silas's knees gave out. Sarah had said she knew about the accounts. He thought she just meant she knew about them. He didn't realize she had handed the files to the feds. The real-life drama was about to turn into a federal prison documentary. The interrogation room at the Federal Plaza was painted a color that could only be described as despair beige. It smelled of stale coffee and fear. Silas Sterling sat handcuffed to a metal table, his bespoke suit now wrinkled and stained with sweat. The arrogance that had defined him for a decade had evaporated, leaving behind a shivering, terrified shell. Across from him sat Special Agent Miller. Miller wasn't like the lawyers Silas was used to. He didn't care about rhetoric or posturing. He cared about numbers. And Silas's numbers didn't add up. Let's talk about the Nebula Holdings account in the Cayman Islands. Miller said, sliding a document across the table. Silas tried to muster some of his old bravado. I don't know what you're talking about. I have no affiliation with any such entity. Miller sighed. He pressed a button on a remote, and a video screen on the wall flickered to life. It was footage from a bank lobby in Georgetown, Grand Cayman. The date stamp was from 6 months ago. In the video, Silas was clearly visible, shaking hands with a banker, signing documents, and laughing. "That's you, isn't it?" Silas Miller asked. "It's a deep fake." AI generated. Silas lied, his voice trembling. Miller chuckled. "Right. And is the signature on the withdrawal slips also AI?" "Silas, we have the paper trail. You moved $3 million of unreported income into that account. That's tax evasion, wire fraud, and money laundering. You're looking at 20 years. Silas felt like he couldn't breathe. 20 years. He'd be an old man when he got out. But I can cut a deal," Silas blurted out. "I have information, I know people. The construction industry in New York is corrupt. I can give you names." Miller looked at him with something akin to pity. "We don't need your names, Silas. We've been watching you for 2 years." 2 years? Silas blinked. "But why didn't you arrest me sooner?" Miller leaned forward. "Because of your wife." Silas froze. "Sarah. What does she have to do with this?" "Sarah. Kensington knew you were cooking the books," Miller explained. "She knew you were skimming from the construction budgets. But every time you made a mess, her lawyers quietly fixed it. They paid the back taxes. They filed amended returns on your behalf without you even knowing. She was keeping you out of prison, Silas. She was cleaning up your mess because she loved you." Miller paused, letting the weight of that sink in. "But the moment you filed that motion to evict her, the moment you tried to humiliate her in public, she stopped protecting you. Her lawyers sent us a very polite letter saying they would no longer be liable for your independent financial activities. They handed over the binders. They gave us everything." Silas put his head in his hands. Sarah hadn't just funded his company. She had been his guardian angel. She had stood between him and the abyss every single day, and he had repaid her by cheating on her with a 23-year-old Instagram model. "Speaking of Tiffany, I want to call my girlfriend," Silas whispered. "Tiffany. She can sell some of the jewelry I bought her. She can get me a lawyer." Miller raised an eyebrow. "Tiffany Valenti. You really think she's going to help you?" "She loves me," Silas insisted. Miller opened the door. "Agent Carter. Bring her in." Silas's heart leaped. Tiffany was here. She had come for him. Tiffany walked in. She wasn't wearing handcuffs. She was wearing a very expensive tracksuit and holding a Starbucks cup. She looked annoyed, not worried. "Tiffany." Silas cried, straining against his cuffs. "Thank God." "You have to call Tiffany," didn't even look at him. She looked at Agent Miller. "Is this going to take long?" she asked, popping her gum. "I have a flight to Miami at 4. "Just need you to confirm the statement," Ms. Valenti, Miller said. Tiffany glanced at Silas with total indifference. "Yeah, I confirmed it. Silas gave me the diamond necklace and the Porsche. He told me he paid for them with off-the-books money from the Caymans. He bragged about dodging the IRS. He said the government was for little people." Silas stared at her, his mouth agape. "Tiffany, what are you doing, immunity deal, babe?" she said, finally making eye contact. Her eyes were cold. "The Fed said they'd confiscate everything you gave me unless I testified. I'm not losing my Porsche because you're a screw-up." "Sorry." She turned to leave. Tiffany Silas screamed. "I left my wife for you. I lost everything for you." She paused at the door, looking back over her shoulder. "Correction, Silas. You didn't leave your wife. She kicked you out. There's a difference. And honestly, you're kind of pathetic without the money." The door clicked shut. Silas was alone again. The silence in the room was heavier now. It was the silence of a grave. He realized with terrifying clarity that he had built his entire life on a foundation of sand, and Sarah was the only thing that had held it together. And he had taken a sledgehammer to her. So Agent Miller said, opening a fresh notebook, "Ready to plead guilty? Or do you want to go to trial and let the Kensingtons destroy whatever dignity you have left?" Silas slumped in his chair. He had no fight left. But his ego, that cursed, unkillable ego, flared up one last time. "I want a trial," Silas whispered. "I want to face her." Miller shook his head. "Bad move, Silas. Very bad move." The trial of United States versus Silas Sterling was the social event of the season. It wasn't held in the family court this time, but in the Thurgood Marshall United States Courthouse, a massive, imposing building that felt like a tomb for the guilty. The courtroom was packed. Reporters, socialites, former business rivals. Everyone wanted to see the fall of the Prince of Real Estate. Silas sat at the defense table. He had been denied bail flight risk given the Cayman accounts, so he had been in federal lockup for 4 months. He had lost 20 pounds. His hair was grey at the temples. He wore a cheap suit provided by his public defender, a harried woman named Ms. Gorski, who clearly had a caseload of 300 other clients. The prosecution's case was a slam dunk. Bank records, wiretaps, Tiffany's testimony. It was a parade of humiliation. They painted Silas not as a mastermind, but as a greedy, incompetent child playing with money he didn't understand. But everyone was waiting for one witness. On the third day, the prosecutor stood up. "The people call Sarah Kensington." A hush fell over the room. The doors opened, and Sarah walked in. She looked radiant. She wore a simple white suit, sharp and elegant. She didn't look like a victim. She looked like a queen visiting her subjects. She walked to the stand, swore the oath, and sat down. She didn't look at Silas. Not once. "Miss Kensington," the prosecutor began, "can you describe your financial relationship with the defendant?" "I supported him," Sarah said, her voice clear and melodic. "I believed in his vision. I authorized the transfers from my family trust to cover his business losses. And did the defendant know about this? No. He believed he was profitable. I instructed the accountants to hide the losses from him. I didn't want to hurt his confidence." "Why?" the prosecutor asked. Sarah paused. She finally looked at Silas. Her eyes were soft, filled with a terrible sadness. "Because I loved him," she said. "And I knew that if he realized he was failing, it would destroy him. Silas's entire identity is built on being successful. I thought if I bought him success, he would eventually grow into it. I thought he would become the man he pretended to be. And did he?" "No," Sarah said quietly. "The more I gave, the more he took. And when he thought he didn't need me anymore, he tried to discard me." Silas felt tears pricking his eyes. It wasn't anger anymore. It was shame. Burning, hot shame. He realized in that moment that she wasn't the villain. She wasn't the enemy. She was the only person who had ever truly loved him, flaws and all, and he had treated her like garbage. Ms. Kensington, the public defender. Ms. Gorski stood up for cross-examination. She looked nervous. No one wanted to cross-examine a Kensington in New York. Ms. Kensington. Gorski stammered, "Is it possible that by hiding the financial reality from Mr. Sterling you contributed to his negligence, that he didn't know he was committing a crime because he thought the money was his?" Sarah tilted her head. "Ignorance of the law is not a defense, Ms. Gorski, and while I may have covered his losses, I never told him to evade taxes. I never told him to open secret accounts in the Caymans to hide money from me. He did that on his own. He stole from the company, which was effectively stealing from me, to hide assets for his divorce." She leaned into the microphone. "I was willing to give him half of everything," Sarah said, her voice trembling slightly. "If he had just asked for a divorce, I would have been fair. I would have given him the company. I would have given him the penthouse. I didn't care about the money. But he wanted to destroy me. He wanted to throw me on the street. That was his choice, not mine." Ms. Gorski sat down. No further questions. The jury didn't take long. 4 hours. Silas stood as the foreman read the verdict. Guilty on all counts: tax evasion, wire fraud, conspiracy. Judge Patterson, a stern woman who had no patience for white-collar criminals, looked at Silas over her glasses and Mr. Sterling, "You have lived a life of extraordinary privilege. You were given opportunities most people only dream of. You had a wife who supported you unconditionally, and your response was greed, deceit, and malice. You are a predator who mistook himself for a king." Silas stared at the floor. "I sentence you to 12 years in federal prison," the judge announced, "followed by 5 years of supervised release. You are also ordered to pay restitution to the Kensington Trust in the amount of $45 million. The gavel banged. The marshals moved in. They grabbed Silas's arms. He didn't fight. He felt numb. As they led him out of the courtroom, he looked back at the gallery. He saw Tiffany scrolling on her phone, already bored. He saw his former business partners avoiding his gaze. And then he saw Sarah. She was standing near the back. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't cheering. She was just watching him. Silas stopped. The marshals tugged at him, but he planted his feet. "Sarah," he croaked. His voice was raw. She looked at him. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm so sorry." Sarah looked at him for a long moment. Then very slowly, she shook her head. She turned around and walked out the double doors into the bright sunlight of the free world. The doors swung shut, leaving Silas in the shadows. 5 years later. The rain in upstate New York was colder than Silas remembered. It soaked through his thin windbreaker as he waited at the bus stop outside the gates of the Otisville Federal Correctional Institution. He was 48 years old, but he looked 60. His hair was white, his face lined with the stress of survival in a medium-security prison. He carried a plastic bag containing his release papers, a toothbrush, and $40 in cash. Silas Sterling, the man who once tipped doormen $100 bills just for opening a door, was now inmate 74922B, released on parole for good behavior. He had nowhere to go. No penthouse, no Hamptons estate. Tiffany had married a hedge fund manager in Miami 3 years ago and hadn't sent so much as a postcard. His old friends pretended he was dead. He took a Greyhound bus back to the city. The skyline of Manhattan rose up like a fortress of glass and steel, a kingdom he had been exiled from. Finding a job was impossible. A felon with a conviction for massive fraud. No bank would touch him. No real estate firm would even let him in the lobby. After 6 months of sleeping in a shelter in the Bronx, Silas finally got a break. It was a humiliating break, but a paycheck. A temp agency sent him to work as a janitor and event setup crew for a high-end charity gala in the West Village. The irony was thick enough to choke on. He used to host these galas. Now he was the guy unfolding the chairs and wiping down the tables. The event was for the New York Literacy Initiative. The venue was a stunning restored library. Silas kept his head down, wearing a generic black uniform, scrubbing a wine stain off the marble floor as the guests began to arrive. He heard the chatter of the elite, the clinking of champagne flutes, the gossip about stocks and mergers. It was a language he used to speak fluently, but now it sounded like a foreign tongue. "The founder is coming," the event manager hissed at Silas. "Look alive, stand by the coat check and take raps. And for God's sake, don't make eye contact. She hates it when the help stares." Silas nodded, staring at his shoes. "Yes, sir." The doors opened. A hush fell over the room. The clicking of cameras started. Silas took the coat of a fat man in a tuxedo, hanging it up mechanically. Then the next guest stepped forward. She was wearing a gown of midnight blue velvet. She moved with a grace that silenced the room. She was older now, a few streaks of grey in her hair, but she was more beautiful than ever. She looked powerful. Real power. Not the loud, screaming power Silas had chased, but the quiet, unshakable power of a mountain. It was Sarah. Silas froze. His hands shook as he reached for her coat. He wanted to run. He wanted to vanish into the floorboards. He prayed she wouldn't recognize him. He was thin grey and broken. He was a servant. She turned to hand him her coat. Her eyes, those warm, intelligent brown eyes, met his. Time stopped. Silas held his breath, waiting for the explosion, waiting for her to scream, to point to tell the security guards to throw him out. He waited for her to laugh at him, to relish his fall. "Look at you, Silas. Look at the great tycoon now." Sarah didn't scream. She didn't laugh. Her eyes widened slightly, a flicker of recognition passing through them. She looked at his name tag, which simply read, Silas. She looked at his rough, calloused hands. She looked at the cheap uniform. She took in the entirety of his destruction in a single second. Silas lowered his head, shame burning his face like acid. "Here is your ticket, ma'am," he whispered, his voice cracking. Sarah took the ticket. Her fingers brushed his. "Thank you," she said softly. She didn't make a scene. She didn't humiliate him. She simply turned and walked into the ballroom, greeted by a wave of applause. Silas stood there, trembling. She had recognized him. He knew she had. And she had done nothing. Later that night, as the event was winding down, the event manager came storming up to Silas. "Sterling, the founder wants to see you in the library office. Now!" Silas's stomach dropped. Here it comes, he thought. She's going to fire me. She waited until the end so she could enjoy it in private. He walked to the heavy oak doors of the office. He knocked. "Come in." He entered. Sarah was sitting behind a desk, sipping tea. She had kicked off her heels. "Close the door, Silas," she said. He obeyed, standing awkwardly near the entrance. "Sarah, Mrs. Kensington, I didn't know this was your event. I'll quit. I'll leave right now." "Sit down," she said, gesturing to a chair. He sat perching on the edge. "You look tired," she said, not mocking, just observing. I've had a rough few years, he managed. I know, she said. I kept tabs on the trial and the parole. Are you going to have me fired? Silas asked, staring at the floor. Sarah sighed. She opened a drawer and pulled out a file. When the temp agency sent over the list of workers for tonight, I saw your name, Silas. I knew you were coming. Silas looked up, shocked. You knew? And you let me come. I own the agency, Silas, she said. The twist hit him hard. What? The Second Chance Staffing Agency. She read from the file. I started it 3 years ago. It helps ex-convicts find work when no one else will hire them. I saw your application. I approved it personally. Silas felt tears welling up. He couldn't stop them. Why? He choked out. After everything I did to you, I tried to take your home. I cheated on you. I humiliated you. Why would you help me? Sarah looked at him with a sad, weary smile. Because, Silas, she said softly, I'm not you. The words hit him harder than any insult could have. It was the ultimate victory. She hadn't beaten him by becoming cruel. She had beaten him by staying kind. You needed a job, she continued, and you're good at organization. The library needs a night custodian. It pays a living wage. It has health insurance. It's yours if you want it. Silas stared at her. A custodian, cleaning up after the people he used to rule. It was a humble, invisible life. But it was a life. I don't deserve it, he whispered. No, Sarah agreed. You don't, but that's what mercy is. It's getting what you don't deserve. She stood up, putting her coat back on. Do the job well, Silas. Don't steal, don't lie. Just be a decent man. That's all I ever wanted. She walked to the door. Sarah, he called out. She paused, hand on the doorknob. Thank you. He wept. She didn't look back. Good night, Silas. She closed the door, leaving him alone in the quiet, warm office. Silas Sterling sat there for a long time, weeping for the man he had been, and the man he might finally slowly begin to become. Outside, the rain had stopped. The city moved on, indifferent to his fate. But for the first time in years, Silas didn't feel like a king or a prisoner. He just felt like a human being. Wow. Talk about a reality check. Silas Sterling thought power was about money suits and intimidation. But in the end, he learned that true power isn't about how many people you can crush. It's about how many people you can lift up, even the ones who hurt you. Sarah didn't just win the court case. She won at life. She walked away with her dignity, her name, and her soul intact, while Silas was left to rebuild his from scratch. It makes you think, doesn't it? If you were Sarah, could you have offered him that job? Or would you have let him rot? It's a hard question. Let me know in the comments below. If your ex tried to destroy you and then showed up years later begging for work, would you help them? Or would you show them the door? I really want to read your answers on this one. If you enjoyed this story of justice, karma, and redemption, please do me a huge favor. Smash that like button to help the algorithm find the truth, and hit subscribe and ring that bell so you never miss a story. We post new brutal takedowns and real-life dramas every single week. Thanks for watching, and remember, be careful who you step on your way up, because you might meet them on your way down. See you next time.